Hey everyone, so we've already done 2 guides for TFT, saving versus reroll and a team comp one as well, but a lot of people have been asking for a general tier list. Also, I've seen a lot of comments saying that I should talk a bit slower, so I'll do my best to breathe a little bit more in the video. Tier lists for TFT aren't that easy to make, honestly, because there are a lot of different things that work at the moment, but we're going to look at the best early game, best mid game, and best late game champions right now. Let me know what you think of the style, or if you disagree with some of them, or any suggestions if we update this in future. I've never actually really done a full tier list, so any ideas will be really good. Plus as well, there will be timestamps to the sections down below. If you'd like to skip to late game, for example, you can go and do that. We are going to start with the early game champions, but the first thing we're going to look at is actually how I kind of like decided, I guess, what S tier, A tier, B tier, and C tier actually are. So S tier champions are good in any comp really. They're just really strong on their own individually, and they are quite contested because everyone wants them. A tier champions need some synergy, but they're really good. And then B tier helps to round out comps and complement other choices, and they're a bit more situational. C tier champions, in my opinion, are ones that are there for synergy. So they're really there for the bonuses, for the origins, and for the classes. So starting with our S tier for the early game champions, Nidalee is very easy to 2-star. The heals are kind of overpowered, honestly, that early into the game, and especially very good with a Rage Blade early, which isn't too hard to find. I say that there's a lot of item RNG, but the chances are you can build one or build something similar and buffer up, which you can then use on someone else later if you want to. Warwick has the wild synergy with Nidalee. Also a brawler buff, which is very easy to get because it's only 2 units to buff up the health, and it has a stun and a heal with his ultimate. Darius has got the knight synergy with one other, but he also has really good healing and AoE damage, and heals are really good early. So far these 3 all have them. Garen has the knight buff as well, so he has the noble buff with 3 at the same time. Spinning also makes him immune to magic damage, which really helps. Also very strong early, and then he has lots of damage. Kha'Zix is a really good early assassin. He's got good isolation damage. If somebody stacks like a kind of AD carry type like a Vayne at the back, he will eliminate them. He's also very easy to get void bonus with him. Pyke is our only 2-cost S tier champion because he's overpowered with a tear or with a Spear of Sojin. He also stuns constantly and has a very wide range on that stun. Vayne finally is good with nobles, stack early Rage Blade and stuff on her as well, and she has a ranger buff you can get with just 2. For our A tier champions, remember these are ones that are actually really good, but they also need a little bit of synergy. So Kassadin has his mana burn. He's almost S tier in my opinion just because of his shield and the fact that people can't ult if he's targeting. Blitzcrank is here as well if he's a 2-star, because his 2-star gets a massive boost to the damage of his hook. So he hooks somebody in and does a lot into your entire team. Graves with a red buff, only with a red buff, is going to be A tier because he hits everybody and burns everybody, which is really good damage. Varus is also here. He has a mana burn with a demon buff, but a big AoE damage, like kind of like a mini Aurelian Soul at that point, and it can really swing fights. Tristana definitely needs items like a tear or a spear or a rage base, something like that, but she has AoE damage and is actually very strong. Lucian and Fiora are similar because they're A tier due to the noble buff that they give with others, but Lucian can dash around like mad with items and actually carry, which is good. Even though Fiora isn't that good, early game, her ultimate is actually pretty decent with the stun, so she does factor into A tier with the buff. Finally, we have our B tier. First of all, we have Ahri. So she gives the wild buff. You can use that with like a Nidalee or a Warwick, but she actually does a lot of good damage herself and kind of underrated. She might actually be A tier, but I'm going to put her in B. And again, I'm going to put Lulu in B because at 2-star, she ults 2 people and it's actually insane. She has no real synergy at that point to the game. Sorcerer buff you can't really get, but the ultimate is just really good. Mordekaiser is here because he's very easy to 2-star, but he doesn't really offer that much, especially not synergy-wise until a bit later into the game. Rek'Sai can give you the void buff and the brawler buff as well for the bonus health, which is really good but doesn't really impact early game. Shen is going to have the ninja synergy, so he has decent damage himself. He also blocks auto attacks, which is really good against someone like a Vayne who you're stacking items on. Lissandra and Braum are both glacials, but they're both not particularly good, honestly. That Braum is pretty bad because there's no second guardian, and Lissandra isn't great but can be buffed up with an item to make her pretty good. Zed has a ninja buff, which is really strong, like we talked about with Shen. You can 3 ninjas at this point with a Kha'Zix, Zed, and Pyke, which is quite good. And then he actually is strong. Elise finally isn't that strong on her own. She'll probably die quite quickly, but these summons, the little spiders, aren't actually that bad. You just don't have any synergy now. Moving into our mid-game stuff, the first thing we're going to do is just look at the changes from the early game into mid. So Tristana moves up to S tier for me, assuming 3-star by the way here, but gunslingers are not very hard to find. You only need 2 of them as well, and she does some really good damage. We're going to move Warwick, Garen, Kha'Zix, and Darius down into A tier now because all 4 of these tanks fall down a bit and can't survive as long anymore. You'll also see we have some others to kind of replace them, but one that has moved up is actually Ahri. We can now run a sorcerer composition if we want to, but we can also run 4 wilds at this point, which both both of those she really fits into well. For B tier, we're moving down Lucian and Graves, they're just not as strong anymore, and we're moving Fiora, Lissandra, and Rek'Sai into the only use for synergy. When we throw in our 3 and 4 cost units into mid-game, we've got some really good S-tier champions. A lot of epics, actually. Cho'Gath is the first one. His crowd control is absolutely insane now. Ever since that buff, it has such a huge area. You get the Brawler and the Void bonuses really easily, and he scales so well. Draven is probably the best damage at this point because of the Imperial buff. It's very easy to get 2 of them, and items as well. Combine that with the Darius, it's really good and insane damage. Sejuani is a similar situation to Cho'Gath. Huge AoE crowd control, and you can't really go wrong at that point. Anar is also similar. Crowd control, really good, but you kind of need him 2-star so that he survives and actually transforms. Brand and Akali are our other damage sources here. Brand, if you get items on him, he's so good. He can hit an entire enemy team for huge damage. Akali only needs 25 mana to cast the ultimate, so you pop this off all the time, and you have Ninja to do a bit more damage. That means Aurelion Sol is in our A tier, right? He is a backline carry, and he doesn't need items before he can do anything, ideally 2-star, and a decent comp around him. He's very good at shredding backline carries, and Morello, for example, can cut healing, which is really good, but he's way more comp dependent and harder to have that mid-game. Kindred is another 4-cost, and their ultimate can win you fights, but they can also be absolutely useless and do nothing at all depending on when it pops. You got really good 2 synergy though with Phantom and Ranger, so you can buff a Vayne, for example, and slot that in very easily. Leona is also here, but only with Braum. Probably the worst individual 4-cost you actually have unless you're using Nobles or the Braum buff. Moving into some of our 3 costs in A tier, we have Ashe to start with. Glacial passive is really solid. Your ultimate, it's very good with a Spear of Sojin or a Tear or something like that. And you can honestly just perma stun. You can also use the 2 Ranger bonus with something like a Vayne, which you've had early game and transition into that mid game. Morgana, I think, is hugely underrated. Massive crowd control around her and very good damage. And if you stick something like a Morello on her, she does so much. Rengar is our 4 wild buff here, decent damage, and you can item him as well for an assassin comp as actually one of the carries. Shyvana is our shapeshifter buff, which we can get at this point if we've got Anar and we've got Nidalee as well, and also Dragon if you want Aurelion Sol later, but she's very strong when transformed. Kennen was also buffed recently and fits into a lot of comps now, I think, honestly, with the Elementalist, with the Ninja, and also with the Yordles, but your AoE ultimate is good damage, and it stuns as well. Finally, we have Katarina rounding out our A tier 3-cost champions, and you need an item on her, so like a Death Cap or a Gunblade or Morello or something, and with Imperial as well. Otherwise, I would have a lower in B tier. So there are no 4-costs in B tier. They're very strong individually anyway, but we do have some 3-costs like Gangplank. You're mostly going to pick him up for the Pirate buff. Honestly, I've never actually seen him work that well on a comp on his own. He just kind of falls off too hard. Volibear as well, maybe it should be a little bit higher, but he's 3-cost. He costs a lot to like 2-star, for example, has very low attack speed, and I think he needs items to really do any real damage. Aatrox is a little bit harder to slot into team comps, being a Demon and a Blade Master. You don't need Blade Master until a lot later into the game, so he doesn't really work mid-game. Veigar as well needs items or a composition for him to really work properly, and that's why he doesn't really work at this point. Poppy and Evelyn are actually not really in A tier, even though they're 3-costs, because I don't actually think they're worth picking up unless you're using them for a specific synergy like Yordles or Assassins. Finally, we're going to move into our late game. This is where the last few fights are going to happen, and when you really do have a team comp already. So in our S tier, we're going to have 3 5-costs. The first one is going to be Kayle. I think she is the strongest 5-cost in the game at the moment. One of the conditions, though, is that she is 2-star, because at 2-star, she's insane. She ults 2 people at a time. It's just game-changing, honestly, especially with tier items to regen a bit faster. But even without synergy, you can actually make her work, but if she's too good in like Nobles or Glacial. Swain is also very good for a 5-cost. You've got Imperial and you've got Shapeshifter buff there, and Demon if you wanted to run that, but he's so strong at 2-star. It's more health at that point, but you already have good damage, you have good healing, and you're not going to really die if you have the Shapeshifter behind him. Yasuo finally is very good synergy for Draven comps because of the Blade Master, but you can actually item him to carry himself. He has decent damage, he tanks a fair chunk with that shield, and he can knock everybody up as well, so he has a little bit of crowd control. I'm going to slot in a new kind of tier here into our late game, so A+, right? We have some of our 4-costs into the S tier, Cho'Gath, Draven, Sejuani, and Gnar, because they can fit into a lot of different comps, and they're really good. Kali, for example, is a very good carry. She just needs kind of a setup to complement assassins or ninjas and items to really make her work. Brand is the same, right? He can keep carrying from mid-game into late game if you have the right comp for it or if you have the right items on him. Aurelion Sol is the same as Brand. AoE damage, nobody really builds to stop magic, which is really strong, but you do need a sorcerer comp or at least like a wild comp. I'm actually going to put Ashe here in A+ as well, because I think late game she can carry with her stuns. Not with damage, but you perma ult the carry at the back with your ultimate, like a Draven or Aurelion or something, and really cut the damage output. You also stun the person in front of you with your auto attacks, which is really good, and she is honestly core for any Glacial or Ranger comp. In our A tier, we have 2 other 5 costs. So Karthus is a sorcerer. He's really good to have in magic comps. His ultimate is decent. Its AoE damage hits everybody, and he's really good at 2-star. But one issue is that you probably don't have any items to give him at that point, so he's never going to really carry. I think Misfortune is a little bit underrated as well. Her ultimate can be good, but can be bad as well if she completely misses it. The issue with Misfortune is you don't have the best origin or class, so it's very hard to fit into a good comp, but she does have good damage on her own. So Pyke, Nidalee, Vayne, and Tristana have all moved down now from S tier into A tier. Pyke is still really good crowd control, but he dies a lot faster now, so he's not going to be S tier anymore, and you really need an assassin comp to make it work. The others just have to be juiced with items and a composition around them to actually pump out any damage anymore. So moving into our B tier. Now remember, these are still pretty good, but you need them for synergy more than anything else. And the first one is Anivia. I think Anivia might need a buff, honestly, because her ultimate ramps up a little bit too slowly. But if you stack items on her, she can actually be really good. She is needed for glacials as well, and she is an upgrade for elementalists. So you can use her origin and her class to benefit, but not really her herself. I've also moved these down from A last time, so normally you won't be carrying with these ones anymore, but they give pretty good synergy. So Kennen and Katarina, like, they fall off a little bit. Braum, as we said, isn't as good anymore, but you need him for glacials. Kha'Zix is there for assassins or void, and Cassian is a really good sorcerer composition tank, by the way. Our C tier has grown a massive amount now we're into late game, because a lot of our 1 cost and 2 costs fall off at this point. You only really want to pick these up if you have a specific need for them, or you really want to build that synergy. So for example, like Warwick is still really good as a tank unit in a wild comp, but otherwise you wouldn't use him. Hopefully this has made a lot of sense to you guys, and I've tried to explain everything as much as I can without making this a really long video, because I could go into it a lot more and a lot more in depth, but there are so many champions that I've tried to cram into this tier list. Let me know what you think about this style of thing, if I should do it a different way or anything else like that. But thank you very much for watching until the very end of the video. I'm streaming loads of TFT, by the way, over on my stream if you want to come and watch that. But for now, I will leave you with robots.